thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us. And the focus here is to learn how you think you're a visual thinker or a design thinker, what got you here and how you use it. So the first thing I want to ask you is for you to introduce yourself rather than me introduce you.
My name is Tony Fernandes. I'm a CEO and Chief Instigator at UE Group. And UE Group is a full-service user experience company that deals with research, design, and software development, all in one package. And the way I like to think about who we are is we do user experience with a capital U, capital X. We tend to solve very difficult problems, and at the same time, carrying forward with the mission of making the world easier to use one product at a time. That's the way I would describe what we're about.
That's great. I like the fact that you talked about users and you didn't really talk about being designers. I think that's very important in design thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you also have a book credit. I think you should mention if you would.
Yes. So I'm author of a book called Global Interface Design. There's probably about 10 books still in my head that have never come out, but that's a much easier place for them to live than actually try to bring them out to the world. But one of these days I'll get on it again.
Great. I'm knowing your this first book, I'm very interested to see how your thoughts have furthered and what else you'd like to share with us. So where are you located, and what's something that everyone should experience where you are or where you consider home?
All right. So we're in the heart of Silicon Valley. We're in San Jose, California, right at the moment. We've also recently opened up an office in Lisbon, Portugal, and we have some folks up in San Francisco and LA as well. And what people should experience in this area, when we have guests, we do what we call the Bay Area trifecta. We like to take people out on the ocean, go wine tasting in the mountains, and then have dinner in the valley. So that's something that everybody should experience.
Great. So for anybody who is not watching, in other words, just listening, should we picture that we're out on the ocean or at wine tasting as we have this conversation?
It might be easier wine tasting. It's a bit rambunctious out in the ocean around here.
Okay, that's great. So how about talking about a project or a company that you are personally working on right now, and give us the design thinking aspects that you're really sinking your teeth into, and so I want to also frame it with this idea of how does that work help your client become design led? In other words, there's a lot of ideas about is design thinking and that applying it to a company's business, is that really effective, even greater than just designing of the product or a product?
Right. So we, as I like to say, user experience for us, it really is rocket science and brain surgery, because we literally work on those problems. And I'm actually going to talk about work related to brain surgery.
Okay.
We're doing work for a major medical device maker. And in their case, I think the struggle, and I think this is true of a lot of companies, the struggle is there's actually a distinction between the customer and the user. The person who's going to make the buying decision versus the people that have to deal with the use on an everyday basis. And part of what we brought to that equation was really creating that dichotomy where, yes, they should focus a lot of marketing and a lot of their thinking about how something is going to be purchased. But we drove a greater injection of thought about who actually uses it. So, for example, in surgery, believe it or not, a lot of medical devices are not used by the surgeon per se. They have, say, the handpiece portion of it, but they're not driving the actual technology. There are scrub techs, or what are called circulating nurses, and other roles that do that. So we brought this consciousness of those roles of the actual users and focused on their usability, not just the definition of usability that impacted the surgeon vis-a-vis the buyer. So, for me, it's an example of where, we've not only brought usability forward, but we've really changed the way people thought about what it means to service the customer, what the voice of the customer is relative to the voice of the user.
So that's very interesting. Let me explore that a little bit more with you in terms of when you say we. Obviously, you're talking about working as a team. And so,
Yes.
what are the kinds of skills that the team will have to bring to the table to accomplish this?
Oh, that's an excellent question. UE Group is patterned after the organizations that I built back in my Apple days and my Netscape days and a bunch of other places I was. And, at any given moment, some of the problems that were being tackled were incredibly complex. They were new technologies. And the only way that I found to really resolve those problems was to use a cross-functional approach where it wasn't just about what people call UX designers. It was about artists. It was about psychologists, technology people, people with very diverse backgrounds, because the complexity of these problems are such that you can't take one kind of thinking and apply it, no matter how many people you put on it, and arrive at a truly breakthrough answer. So we as a team are extremely mixed in terms of our backgrounds. And to me, that's part of what makes us really successful in tackling these kinds of problems.
Is everybody together all the time, or do people sort of come in and out of the team as they're needed, or how does that work?
I would say the team stays intact. By the nature of these kinds of projects, there are often research phases and design phases, production phases. And I would say that the team always stays in touch, but the focus changes, and therefore the numbers of people involved, where there might be multiple researchers working at the beginning, but during the design phase, there might be only one researcher who represents that point of view that remains as part of the team. So there is an element of people coming in and out of the project, but the team collectively stays intact throughout the life of the project.
And when you're talking with, we'll say, the business or the organizational side of the company that you're working for, and I'm called that the sort of the super client, even though you are focused very much on their clients.
Yes.
You also have to treat them.
Yes.
You have to treat them as a user for you. So how do you accommodate that?
So yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, we look at their user experience as well in terms of how we do our work. And that often comes in the form of how we put together our deliverables. I think one of the problems that you often run across in design thinking or user experience, or however you want to call it, people follow a rote process and assume if you follow that rote process, you're going to wind up with a positive outcome. And in our case, we look a little bit more broadly at what the positive outcome is. Sometimes that means giving people the ability to influence the organization, giving them the ability to communicate the information that was gathered. So we, in some ways, start with the end product of what our client needs, not just from a product standpoint, but from a communication standpoint as well. So we put a lot of emphasis on how we deliver information, how visual we make it, for example, how simple it is to distribute and have people grok the core ideas, rather than just having people believe that they've gone through a process and therefore some positive thing must have come out. We really want our clients to get something of value out of the process.
Well, having used the word grok, which is a word I I have used in the past too. That talks. I want to talk about your experience because that means you've been around a while, having done things with different people.
It's
With
true.
right. I'm with you all the way on that. So having said that, I want to ask you, and if you don't mind, is there um, in the design thinking ethos, there's this
Mhm.
idea that failure is a learning point, and do you have an example of a place where, in hindsight, you really would do something differently, or a big, we'll call it quote unquote failure that actually turned into a major learning point, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. Well, there is something that comes to mind, and this is maybe going to be a little bit of an unusual example,
Okay.
and it relates to your earlier question about servicing our client. I think that sometimes uh, pressures such as ego and politics and all of these things that happen in larger organizations unfortunately have an impact on the design process. And in one example, we were had a client that was in essence demanding that we do things a certain way, and we, trying to be good customer service providers, went and did things the way they wanted it done, only to come to the end and have them say, well, you did what we said, not what we needed.
Wow.
And so to me, that was valuable learning that happened, I think, early on in the history of the company, where we've in some cases had to deliver or over deliver um, uh, uh, end products that went beyond what they were asking us, simply to communicate to them opportunities that they couldn't envision. Often, not everybody can think as creatively about a problem, and therefore they instruct as best they can or as best they know. But sometimes I think when you deal with this kind of design work, it can be a bit of a straitjacket. I think part of what companies get from us that is perhaps one of the most valuable assets is simply creativity. And unfortunately, creativity is something that's not discussed enough when we talk about design thinking or user experience or any of these fields. And by creativity, by the way, I'm not necessarily talking about artistic creativity. It's creative interpretation of the information that's gathered, creative ways of satisfying the customer and user needs that go beyond what is immediately obvious.
So that leads me to ask, what would your next book be about?
Well,
What's on top of mind that you would really love to see?
what's on top of mind, to be totally honest with you, is I fear for this field right
Wow.
now.
Okay.
I think it used to be about solving real problems for people. And I'm very proud of the fact that we as a company are still solving those very real problems. But what I see a lot of, I see a lot of people saying they do user experience or use design thinking as a legitimizing crutch for what they're doing. But often they're really approaching problems very superficially, very aesthetically,
Mm.
and are not really diving into how you can leverage a solution to really empower people in a new way and solve a problem for them that they can't solve any other way. I, in my particular case, I feel like I think the way that I do, and I think by extension, this company thinks the way that it does, because I've been, I was brought up in the primordial soup of tech as we know it today,
Right.
right? So being in Netscape, I saw what the browser could have been, not just what it was. I saw what HTML could have been, not what it is now. And a lot of people don't think about the fact that HTML did not come down from the mountain written on stone tablets. people had to quickly come up with what HTML was because of a need. You
Right.
know? And so when you think about the internet and what it could be as a medium, um, a lot people don't think of the problem that way. They just think about, well, here's how far I can push HTML, and they don't ask the question. Maybe HTML is the wrong thing to be using right now, for example. So, I think because of that dynamic, I feel like this area of design and usability, whatever you want to call it, has dramatically slowed, and in some cases almost gone backwards. I think if we think about it, think about how easy it used to be to turn on a TV and just watch a show compared to the way it is now, where you're dealing with inputs and multiple boxes. Or think about the fact that you used to go to a gas station and with a single gesture you turn on a pump, and now it takes 18 clicks to get to the point that you can pump gas. And I fear that there's not enough critical thinking. Step back and ask these fundamental questions about whether we're collectively making the world better and easier, or we're just coming up with solutions that allow the problem to be solved very superficially.
Right. So let me ask, if Instagram is still around in the state we know it, pretty much the state we know it in 5 years from now, and you and your company come up on top of scroll, what's the caption to the picture? What's the picture, and then what's the caption to the picture?
Well, I would say the picture would be of people. It would not be of technology, and I think the caption would be, these people were empowered in a new way by using X. And that X would be something that we designed and came up with a really novel way of having them solve a problem that has just not been solved well in the past. That's what I would imagine anyway.
Great. This has been a very rich conversation, and I appreciate it. And the wine has been delicious to enjoy with you as we've chatted. Is there anything you'd like to mention before we close out for now? And perhaps we'll have another chat in the future before 5 years show up. But
well, I would say, I believe that this field and the nature of this work is enormously important. And the people that are working on it are doing really important tasks that are benefiting not only individual companies, but society as a whole. And I would simply encourage people in the field to go beyond, just the superficial element of what people are now calling user experience, and to really think long and hard about how what they're doing is really creatively solving a problem, rather than just making something really pretty.
That's great. Thanks for your time and for your sharing. And again, thanks for the wine.
No problem. Have a great day.